We're going to go to another one of our reporters. Back to Washington now. Outside the White House is Sherwin Bryce-Pease standing by for us. Sherwin, you were in the room, as we've been saying, a smooth start initially for Team South Africa, but things did get rather tense towards the end. Do they feel, or is the feeling, that they managed to turn it around?
Well, it was a smooth start based on a recalibration that happened in the White House, but the program shifted here immediately at the beginning of President Ramaphosa's arrival. Initially, he was supposed to go in and sign a visitor's book. Then they were supposed to go into a bilateral lunch with both delegations. And then the Oval Office scenario that you just saw play out on live television was supposed to happen. So the sequence here unsettled the South African delegation immediately, but they recalibrated, they readjusted. And I'll tell you, there were a lot of strange looks on their faces sitting there in this environment where topics on any subject are lobbed while the guest, the South African president, was seated there. And unexpectedly so, the conversation was dominated by the White Afrikaner issue, the issue of genocide, and of course the turning down the lights moment where video of Julius Malema, the leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters, was played. He's singing of the chant, "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer," and of course the context of that would be how it has been ventilated in the Equality Court and other judicial fora, and of course the long history associated with that song, but also very difficult for the South African delegation to explain that history and based on our constitution that allows for free speech, particularly in Parliament. There are rights afforded to members of Parliament in terms of what they can and cannot say. Just ask Patricia de Lille when she was, instigating investigations into the arms deal under the Mbeki administration. There's a great deal of levity allowed politicians in South Africa's Parliament, but also in terms of South Africa's constitution and free speech. And you saw President Ramaphosa struggle there to push back, essentially explaining that South Africa was a constitutional democracy and that there are rights afforded political parties, but making the point that this was not government policy. And then you saw the other interlocutors, among them Johan Rupert of Remgro, of course a close friend of both President Ramaphosa and President Trump, explain that South Africa essentially has a rural crime problem, and that it is a partnership that they are seeking from the United States in terms of sharing of technology. He talked about the need for drones, the recapacitating of police stations in those rural areas, but also then the point made that this is not a white problem but a crime problem that affects all races in South Africa. Look, there will be a constituency in the white minority Afrikaner group in South Africa that will be joyed and buoyed by what they saw from President Donald Trump, but this was a very unexpected moment, turning the lights down, playing the words of an opposition figure. But I think at the end, President Ramaphosa asserting that this was not government policy and that they are seeking partnership, they are seeking a collaboration, as was the case when the COVID-19 pandemic was happening, and the U.S. administration provided ventilators, respiratory ventilators that were in high demand and in short supply at the time. This was also impressed upon President Trump by South Africa's president, that this was an economic relationship, a trade relationship that had a long history, and so they were looking for partnership moving forward. But a lot of topics there, a lot of random questions, a room where you have to shout the loudest to be seen and heard, and certainly, a chapter in a book one day, no doubt.
And Sherwin, they've now gone into their closed-door session. Do we know how long we might have to wait for any outcome from that? And will that outcome come in the same fashion as what we witnessed over the last hour or so?
Well, what we are expecting here is we are positioned here outside where President Ramaphosa's vehicle is passed under the canopy behind me. They are in now for a lunch, right? The lunch was supposed to happen before what we just saw, so it's all been reversed. We expect that they're now in lunch and having their bilateral meeting with the teams that we were at pains to share with you earlier. And then we understand that the South African delegation will have a press conference at the President's Hotel, which we will then leave here to go to. We understand the possibility of all the ministers in the room will be there. But I think, as we talk at Tembekile here about the ministers in the room, I think there was quite a poignant moment when President Ramaphosa called on his Agriculture Minister, John Steenhuisen, right, a member of the Government of National Unity, and also in his capacity as the Minister of Agriculture, really making the point that there is a crime problem in South Africa, but also the collaboration that the DA and the ANC went into, the partnership was, in his words, to keep the likes of Mkhonto Sizwe and the EFF out of government because of, certainly from the DA's perspective, how they see the rhetoric and the singing of kill the boer, kill the farmer. President Ramaphosa also then asserting the fact that this was something that the government had repudiated and rejected. And I think you even saw Fikile Mbalula, the Secretary General of the African National Congress, quite recently talking about how they would rather the song not be sung. But of course, everyone is at liberty to do as they please in terms of South Africa's free speech prescripts that are embedded in the South African constitutions. There's so much here to unpack. I'm sort of like, rewinding the reel in my head as I'm talking to you. But maybe I should throw it back to you for another question.
Sherwin, we'll come back to you, in fact, throughout the evening. Let's do it in bite sizes because, as you say, quite a lot to digest. Sherwin Bryce-Pease outside the White House for us. We'll